What if I told you that your journey to billionaire status was not just a dream, but a divine promise? That your desire for wealth isn't greed, but God's whisper calling you to your purpose? Stay with me, because in the next few moments I will reveal the spiritual law of abundance that few ever dare to unlock. And by the end of this message, you will walk away with a conviction so deep you'll never think about wealth the same way again. Take a look at the world around you, not through the lens of limitation, but through the lens of divine intention. Everything in nature, when observed closely, reveals a staggering truth. God is a God of increase. From the moment the universe was spoken into existence, the blueprint of abundance was embedded into the very structure of creation. This was not by accident. It was not a side effect. It was by design. God didn't whisper creation into being. He declared it in fullness and overflow. The stars were not placed one by one. They were scattered by the billions. The oceans weren't measured with teaspoons. They were poured out with force and fury. Trees don't bear one fruit. They bear baskets of fruit season after season from a single seed. Look at the orange tree. One seed becomes one tree. That one tree yields hundreds of oranges every year. Each orange carries about 10 seeds. Multiply that, and you have thousands of seeds, each one capable of creating another orchard. The design is not addition, it's exponential multiplication. This is how God thinks. This is how the kingdom of heaven operates, and this is the pattern you were born from. You are part of this ecosystem of divine surplus. You were never meant to live hand to mouth, scraping by, tolerating lack as if it were noble. Poverty was never part of paradise. Before man fell, there was no mention of scarcity. Only after disobedience did thorns and sweat enter the picture, but the original vision was, and still is, plenty, overflow, beauty, growth, and access without restriction. You were made in the image of the Creator. That means the power to multiply, to expand, and to produce wealth is already in your spiritual DNA. Consider the sun, one source, endless energy. It powers the entire planet, warms every nation, grows every harvest. It doesn't charge rent, it doesn't hold back. It gives constantly, lavishly, without fear of running out. Why? Because it was created by a God who knows no shortage. You too were created to shine, to give, to produce, not in measured rations, but in radical abundance. When God spoke over mankind, his first recorded command was not a restriction, it was a blessing. Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion. That is the language of increase. That is the calling placed upon your life. Yet many have been programmed to believe that wealth is unspiritual, that prosperity is suspicious, that too much is dangerous. But nothing could be further from divine truth. The creator of gold is not afraid of gold. The one who laid the foundation of the mountains did not do so to keep you poor. He placed the treasure in the earth for you to uncover, claim, and steward. You were not born into a world of lack. You were born into a system of overflow. The only thing that stands between you and that divine wealth is the veil of unbelief, the lie that says you must settle for less than God's intention. Even the human body reflects this abundance. The mind is capable of generating more ideas in a day than can ever be executed in a lifetime. The body regenerates cells by the millions every second. Your lungs breathe without needing permission. Your heart beats without needing instruction. You are not a machine. You are a miracle, engineered by the master builder himself to function in sync with the rhythms of increase. When you align with that truth, when you break free from the mental poverty that religion and society have tried to impose, you will see that your very existence is evidence of a God who not only permits abundance, he promotes it. Desire is not a fleeting emotion. It is not mere ambition or wishful thinking. It is, in truth, one of the most powerful and misunderstood forces implanted in the human soul. When rightly understood, desire becomes a divine compass, pointing not toward fantasy but toward destiny. It is the whisper of the Creator within your consciousness, stirring you to pursue the very thing you were born to become. It does not arise randomly. It is never arbitrary. The deepest desires of your heart were not manufactured by culture or ego. They were deposited in you by God Himself. Think of desire as a coded message from your future self, one that pulls you forward magnetically toward your assignment. When a child watches a plane soar overhead and feels something ignite inside him, an unexplainable pull toward the sky, that is not coincidence. That is the soul recognizing its calling. When a young woman feels drawn to lead, to speak, to shift nations with her words, that burning is not ego, it is evidence. When you, even in the quiet moments, feel an ache for financial greatness, for unimaginable wealth, not to flaunt, but to build, to influence, to create, that ache is not sinful. That is sacred. That is the divine knocking at the door of your destiny. Desire always precedes manifestation. Nothing appears in the physical world unless it first appears in the spiritual realm of longing. A man cannot build a mansion unless he first sees it in his spirit. A woman cannot launch a movement unless it first rises up as a fire in her belly. The entrepreneur who builds $1 billion enterprise starts not with funding, not with skill, but with an unrelenting desire, one that refuses to be silenced, one that keeps him awake at night, one that will not leave him alone until it is brought to life. Look at the seed of an oak tree. It carries within itself the potential for forests, but unless it is planted, unless it is nurtured, the fullness of that potential remains invisible. Desire is that seed. It does not shout, it whispers. It often appears as restlessness, as longing, as hunger for something more, but when honored, it grows. When watered with faith and action, it flourishes. And just like the oak, your desires were never meant to stay buried. They were meant to grow into something the world can see and benefit from. Consider the countless individuals who have transformed history, not because they had more education, more talent, or more favor than others, but because they dared to trust the rightness of their desires. Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb because he was comfortable in the dark. He desired light, and he pursued that vision with relentless force. Oprah Winfrey did not settle for being a local news anchor. Her desire to connect with millions, to empower, to inspire, that desire guided her, pulled her through rejection and adversity. Elon Musk didn't build rockets because he was curious. He had a deep desire to stretch humanity's reach, and he followed that inner flame beyond the limits of what others thought possible. What must be understood is this. If the desire is in you, the provision already exists. The blueprint of your future is embedded within the desire itself. It is not something you have to earn. It is something you must recognize, accept, and then move toward with unwavering resolve. You were not born to chase random wants. You were born to fulfill a divine assignment, and that assignment reveals itself through what you want most deeply, not what others say you should want. Faith is the unseen force that activates the invisible laws of abundance. It is the mental dynamite that explodes limitation and clears a path to wealth that exists beyond logic, education, or circumstance. Without faith, every plan collapses under the weight of fear. Without faith, every opportunity appears as risk. But with faith, even a mustard seed of it, a man becomes unstoppable, capable of bending reality to fit the shape of his belief. Wealth is never just a matter of work. It is a matter of belief before results, of conviction before confirmation. Faith is the trigger that moves unseen riches from the realm of possibility into the realm of possession. Faith is not hope. Hope is passive. Faith is aggressive. Hope wishes. Faith decides. Hope waits. Faith acts. Faith is the spiritual substance of wealth, the inner title deed that says it is already mine, even when the bank account says zero and the world says impossible. It is the inner voice that defies appearances, that dares to speak abundance in the face of famine, that stands in the middle of lack and declares, I am rich, not rich in fantasy, not rich in imagination, but rich in truth, because wealth first begins in the mind before it is reflected in matter. Take, for instance, the story of Henry Ford. The man was not an engineer. He was not academically trained to design combustion engines, but he had a vision that gripped him, a belief that the automobile could be for the common man. When everyone told him it couldn't be done, he believed anyway. He hired men smarter than him, challenged the norms of manufacturing, and through sheer faith in his vision, he changed the entire transportation industry. His wealth followed his belief, not the other way around. The money came as a result of a mind convinced of its own mission. Faith does not ask for proof before moving forward. It moves first and creates the proof. Look at the life of Andrew Carnegie. He was born into poverty, worked long hours in a cotton factory, and yet somehow believed he would become the richest man in the world. Where did such a belief come from? Not from his environment, not from his education. It came from faith. Raw, unshakable, unreasonable faith. That belief governed his actions, attracted the right men, and opened doors that others couldn't even see. And when you study his story closely, you see that his wealth was a natural consequence of a supernatural confidence. Faith activates ideas. Faith activates people. Faith activates timing. And faith activates the laws of wealth that respond not to need, but to belief. The universe does not deliver based on desperation. It delivers based on expectation. It does not respond to those who wish to be wealthy. It responds to those who know they are. The moment you decide that wealth is yours, not someday, not hopefully, not maybe, but certainly, immediately, unquestionably, you trigger a chain reaction. Circumstances begin to shift. People begin to show up. Opportunities begin to form, not because you forced them, but because your belief created a gravitational pull that drew them to you. In the same way, electricity is invisible but can power cities, faith is unseen but powers the flow of abundance. And like electricity, it only works when the switch is turned on. You must flip that mental switch. You must decide that wealth is your rightful inheritance, backed by divine authority, not because of who you are, but because of whose you are. Wealth, like every other form of success, is the byproduct of internal certainty. Until you believe it inwardly, you will never hold it outwardly. All the belief in the world, all the desire, all the faith, without action, remains spiritual potential, never material reality. Action is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. It is the hand that reaches into the storehouse of heaven and pulls down the promise. It is the one force that confirms to the universe, to God Himself, that you are not just a believer, but a doer, a participant in your own divine assignment. God has no interest in idle visionaries. He moves through those who move. Faith without works is dead, not because the vision is wrong, but because the activation has not been triggered. Every law of abundance demands motion. The farmer cannot pray for harvest if he never plants. The builder cannot expect a house if he never lays a brick. The entrepreneur cannot expect to receive millions if he never dares to launch. Action, deliberate, bold, forward-moving action, is the evidence of belief and the currency of destiny. You do not wait until the conditions are perfect to begin. You begin, and that act of beginning reshapes the conditions. The world does not reward intentions. It rewards execution. Consider the story of Colonel Harlan Sanders. At the age of 65, with nothing but a chicken recipe and a dream, he went door to door, restaurant to restaurant, being rejected over 1,000 times before anyone gave him a chance. Most would have said he was too old, too late, too underqualified, but he kept knocking, kept pitching, kept acting. That persistence, that willingness to move without a guarantee, eventually led to the creation of a global empire, Kentucky Fried Chicken. His belief was real, but it was his action that brought the reward. Faith was the fire, but action was the fuel. Too many people sit on ideas waiting for a sign, a confirmation, a feeling of readiness. But the truth is, clarity does not come before motion. It comes because of motion. God rarely gives you the entire blueprint. He gives you the first step, and when you take it, the next one appears. The Red Sea did not part until Moses lifted his staff. The walls of Jericho did not fall until Joshua marched. In every case, action was the key that released supernatural intervention. You are not waiting on heaven. Heaven is waiting on you. The tragedy of inaction is that it kills dreams slowly while allowing excuses to sound noble. I'm praying on it becomes a stall tactic. I'm waiting for confirmation becomes spiritualized procrastination. But the truth is, you know what to do. The vision is already burning inside you. The nudge to start, to write, to build, to sell, to lead, it's there. But without action, that divine nudge becomes a nagging regret. The treasure is already stored in your heavenly account, but withdrawal requires motion. The keys have been handed to you, but you must get up and open the vault. Think of a seed once more. You can hold it in your hand, admire its potential, study its structure, even pray over it. But unless it is planted in the soil, it produces nothing. Wealth works the same way. You can dream about it, declare it, visualize it, but until you start the business, make the offer, send the email, take the risk, it stays dormant, not because it isn't yours, but because the laws that govern increase demand participation. The universe does not pay spectators. It pays creators. It pays those who initiate. The greatest ideas in history have died in notebooks, buried under fear and hesitation. Meanwhile, those with less talent but more courage changed the world, not because they were better, but because they acted. They didn't wait until they were ready. They started when it was hard. They moved when others paused. And their reward was not just success, but the unfolding of a divine destiny that would never have revealed itself if they hadn't first taken the step. Wealth is not an accident, nor is it an ornament for vanity. It is not the random reward of fate or the exclusive prize of the fortunate few. Wealth is a tool of destiny, a divine assignment wrapped in currency. It is never merely about money. It is about movement. It is about what that money is called to build, transform, heal, and restore. The moment you begin to see wealth not as a status symbol, but as a sacred responsibility, everything changes. Your motives become purified, your energy becomes focused, and heaven begins to back your effort with supernatural alignment. You are not meant to pursue wealth for the sake of consumption, but for construction, to create systems, businesses, institutions, and legacies that lift others from survival into significance. Wealth has a voice, and when placed in the hands of the righteous, that voice becomes a force of liberation. It builds schools in places where ignorance once reigned. It drills wells in villages where thirst once silenced generations. It funds entrepreneurs, empowers families, and breaks generational curses. Wealth in the hands of the faithful becomes a weapon against darkness. Look at the great philanthropists, past and present, not just those who made money, but those who understood the mission behind the money. Andrew Carnegie didn't just amass billions. He built over 2,500 libraries. Why? Because he understood that true wealth multiplies impact. Madam C.J. Walker didn't just create products. She created jobs for thousands of women who had been left behind by society. The money was not the end. It was the beginning of her mission. The wealth was not the goal. It was the engine behind her assignment. Even in Scripture, we see this truth laid bare. Abraham was blessed, not just for his comfort, but to be a blessing to nations. Joseph rose to power in Egypt and managed wealth, not to bask in luxury, but to save entire nations from famine. The Good Samaritan was only able to help because he had the means. He didn't just pray for the wounded man, he paid for his recovery. He didn't just have compassion, he had coin, and that coin made compassion practical. Without wealth, even the most noble intentions remain locked in the realm of theory. Wealth amplifies what already lives inside you. If you are generous, it multiplies your giving. If you are wise, it increases your influence. If you are a builder, it gives you the bricks. But if you do not understand the mission of wealth, it will either evade you or consume you. It must be stewarded with vision. It must be aimed like an arrow. For those who recognize that wealth has a mission, the pursuit of money becomes sacred. You no longer chase it for pleasure alone, but for purpose, because you've seen what you're called to build, and you know that vision requires funding. You were not born by accident. You were not randomly assigned to this era, this generation, or this moment in time. You are the chosen vessel, hand-picked by divine intelligence, marked by the fingerprints of God, and set apart for a purpose that carries eternal weight. Every gift you possess, every skill that comes naturally to you, every challenge you've endured, they all point to this one truth. You are the carrier of a sacred assignment, and wealth is only one part of your equipment to fulfill it. You were not sent here to merely survive. You were sent to steward power, to govern opportunity, and to distribute influence like a king appointed by heaven. You may look at your life and see flaws, failures, or lack, but let me tell you with absolute clarity, heaven doesn't call the qualified, it qualifies the called. The Creator does not make vessels of silver and gold for display. He makes living vessels, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in purpose. When God needed to deliver a nation, He didn't choose the best speaker. He chose Moses, a man who stuttered. When God wanted to establish His kingdom through wealth, He didn't pick the high priest. He chose Abraham, a man advanced in age and childless. When He needed to anoint a king, He passed over the strong, the impressive, and the experienced, and chose David, a shepherd boy in the fields. Why? Because the power was never in the vessel's appearance. It was in its willingness to be used. You, too, have been carrying a call that can't be shaken off, that nagging sense that you were meant for more, that vision that won't leave you alone, that hunger for wealth that refuses to die down. It's not greed, it's revelation. You are being summoned by destiny to stand in a place of impact, and for that you must be funded. God doesn't call vessels and then leave them empty. When you accept the call, the resources follow. The supply is tied to your yes. But it requires that you see yourself correctly, not as a bystander to greatness, but as an instrument through which greatness flows. Think of a pipeline. It carries water to thirsty cities, but in doing so, it too is filled. The pipeline doesn't own the water, but it is essential to the flow. In the same way, you are not the source of wealth, but you are critical to its distribution. When you see yourself as a chosen vessel, you stop questioning your worth and start focusing on your assignment. You stop comparing and start creating. You stop waiting for permission and start walking in authority. You recognize that heaven has chosen you not just to receive wealth, but to carry it with purpose. Look at the modern-day visionaries who move billions, not because they begged for power, but because they answered a calling. They became vessels, willing, open, obedient. They turned their companies into platforms, their influence into movements, their products into catalysts for transformation. They didn't hide behind false humility. They stepped into divine responsibility. You are no different. That same power rests within you, waiting not for perfection, but for permission. Your gifts were not given to be buried. Your influence was not designed to be muted. And your wealth, yes, your future billions, are not for indulgence alone, but for divine impact through a vessel who understands the mission. So I ask you now, will you answer the call? Will you believe the promise? Will you step into the divine destiny that's been waiting for you to rise? Because God has already written the check. The ink is dry. The only question left is, will you cash it